Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to our Team Tuesday, this week with Avipaul Bhandari. Hey Avi, welcome back.
Oh, thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. So Tuesday is, of course, Team Tuesday here on the podcast. And before we jump into the team story, do share with us, what was the book that most inspired you in your career as a Scrum Master?
Not necessarily a Scrum book, but I was thinking, what book has massively influenced me recently? And I've chosen the book called The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay Stanier. And the reason I chose this book is one-to-ones is a tool I use a lot as a Scrum Master, and I think it's invaluable. And this book really just helped me have a coaching approach to those one-to-ones, where you're not giving answers per se, but you're asking exploratory questions that will lead others to their answers as opposed to you imposing yours. And so the book is, I think it's a set of 7 questions, which are like powerful coaching questions, which really did help me in my one-to-one format when speaking with people one-to-one.
Absolutely. Is there one question that you think all Scrum Masters should know about and maybe gets them curious to read the book?
That's a good question. I'm kind of switching between two right now in my mind. I'm going to go with what Michael Bungay Stanier says is the most powerful coaching question, and that is, and what else? The reason I've chosen that question is it's usually used towards the end of a coaching session where the coach would ask the coachee, and what else? And then stay quiet and will be silent. And what it does is it forces the person being coached to go deeper. So using that silence, that uncomfortable silence, to actually go deeper and surface more ideas to a level of depth they might not have gone before, and potentially come up with something quite innovative or new, which they hadn't considered before that moment. And so I use that in one-to-ones, but also with teams. So for example, if they're brainstorming, they've got a few ideas, I might sometimes say, and what else? And stay quiet. And someone will want to fill that awkward silence with an idea. So it might not always be that same questions, but just being comfortable with silence when working with your teams or individuals.
And helping them also recognize that there's more in their mind.
Exactly. I've been on the receiving end of this as well. And, when someone has asked me that question, it's like, there's that initial, like, what do you want from me? and then you actually apply your mind and you're like, oh, here's another idea. Wow, that was unexpected. And then you start feeling good about yourself. Like, hey, I just came up with a great idea, which wasn't there 2 seconds ago. And so if you can give that to someone else and make them feel good about their ideas and they contributing these to, either your one-on-ones or meetings, that's surely a nice thing.
And I think this is a great practical tip for that people first approach to coaching.
Completely.
And talking about coaching, of course, we very often work with teams and coach teams. But sometimes, even when we're working with them, they just get themselves into trouble. Sometimes even perhaps because of how we are working with them. But let's put that aside for a minute, Avi, and let's explore the story of a team and, tell us a little bit about the context, how many people, so that we understand what kind of context there was. But walk us through how that team developed this behaviors, this approach that may have seemed small at first, but eventually became a big problem for the team.
Sure. Full disclosure, I didn't work directly with this team, but I did run their retrospective at the end of the project, and I was visiting them occasionally. It was run by someone else was working with them at the time. Now it would have been, I believe it was a team of about eight people, including engineers, testers, product owner, etc. And this is going back a long way. And the reason I'm using this example is because I've seen this pattern emerge since then. And they were working on an app when apps were a new thing. And it was an iPad app. And there were aggressive dates, I would say. And there's a few themes with this. Again, it's self-management gone wrong. So self-management leading to harmful and uninformed decisions, unrealistic expectations from leadership.
So tell us a little bit more about how that unfolded. So you were working with the team, and what did you hear?
Yeah. So they decided, I think fairly early on, that because there were deadlines, aggressive deadlines, that they wanted to park the Scrum events. They didn't want to have to. They considered Scrum an overhead, and so they didn't have your planning sessions, retrospectives, or refinements or anything. I think, from what I recall, I remember they had stand-ups possibly, but it was very much just focused on the tasks that they had on the board at the time. And their perspective was, we know what we need to do. We don't need to do all that stuff. Let's just get on with it. We've got a deadline. Yeah. So let's just keep it simple. We're working our tasks day to day, and we'll hit our deadline and it'll be great. So that's the whole managing themselves out of a process, self-management going wrong.
So when you heard this from the teams or the team members, what came to your mind? What were you thinking when you heard about the team wanting to do this?
So I wasn't working directly with them, but I remember being told this, and I was like, wow, that's brave. I wouldn't do that. I would continue working with your processes, but they had decided this amongst themselves, and I wasn't part of their team. So I guess I didn't have the place to influence them.
And so you were maybe surprised and maybe hesitant to see where this was going. Is that how you felt?
I felt as though, yeah, I was definitely surprised, and I felt as though it wasn't going to end well. Just seeing that, it just felt a bit short-sighted.
So what happened in practice then?
What happened was, because they didn't have any kind of high-level view of their progress, they didn't have planning sessions, they didn't do retrospectives, so there was no kind of learning from their mistakes or anything. It was just a continuous stream of work. Leadership asked for more, so they had no idea of how much work they had left. The deadline was
more work, you mean?
For more features as part of the app.
Okay.
And so it was just vague, really. They just didn't really know if they were on track or not. Yet leadership were like, hey, if you can do this while you're at it, just do this feature as well and add this feature as well. And yeah, no, deadlines are changing. And for some reason, they didn't challenge that because they just had no view of whether they were on track or not.
So when you think about this kind of behaviors, and you're not the first one to mention this type of, hey, let's just go faster, let's drop Scrum,
yeah,
which obviously in the long term is going to bite them. But when you hear this now, like imagine that you're just going into work and you hear that a team is doing this type of, or implementing this type of idea of dropping process and just do it. We used to call this cowboy coding way back when I started. But how do you feel and what do you think? And what can you share with our Scrum Masters that are listening to us about how to deal with this type of situations?
Yeah, it's a great question. Because I see it sometimes, particularly at smaller companies where they've grown from being just a few people in a room, where they became successful without processes. So for them, they see Agile as an overhead, which is really interesting because obviously 20 years ago, it was cutting a lot of overhead that we used to have in the old way of doing things. So I was surprised to hear people saying, hey, we don't need all that extra stuff, all that extra overhead. I think it's just important to remind people the benefits of what Agile brings in whatever form they want to choose. Like, not necessarily tied to a particular way, like Scrum or Kanban, as long as they are following a set of guidelines, I guess, to help them in their day to day. Like if I can, I would warn them about what I saw with that project that went wrong. There were death marches, constantly long hours, poor quality, lots of bugs, missed deadlines, and there was like reputational impact, stress, low morale. So it's important to kind of outline the negative repercussions of not choosing these things, but also the benefits, conversely, the benefits of actually adopting these practices.
When I hear this type of stories, and there's been quite a few, I'm always reminded of this phrase by Edward Deming. He said, if you can't explain what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I think this is such a great verbalization of a very simple concept, which is that if you can't describe it, it's not repeatable. It's ad hoc. Now, ad hoc may be good enough in some contexts, but if you have more than 2 or 3 people, ad hoc is going to cause a lot of confusion, missed information, miscommunication, missed expectations, not to mention the fact that if you have stakeholders, those 3+ people that are not executing a repeatable process will not be able to tell anyone outside the team what is going on, because they don't even have the language to communicate it, because processes are also a language for us to communicate with the wider organization.
Exactly. Yeah. So thinking back to that example, they lacked that language to explain where they were and what exactly was going on.
It's definitely a great insight. Thank you for sharing that with us, Avi.
No worries. Pleasure.
Tuesday is Team Day here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. But tomorrow we talk about something that goes beyond the work we do with the teams. We will talk about how to lead change and what our guests have learned from leading and participating in change programs during their career. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.